The party was in full swing at the neighbor's house with laughter and loud music echoing through the shared backyard fence. Mike felt his heart racing as he approached the entrance. He had suspected something for weeks, but confirmation came from the whispers of neighbors at the local diner. When he opened the door, the scene he found made his stomach turn. His wife Sarah laughing and flirting with the neighbor, their bodies too close. The shock in her eyes when she saw him, there was instantaneous. Mike didn't say a word, just stared at her, letting the weight of betrayal sink onto his shoulders. The party seemed to continue in slow motion as he turned and left, his mind racing with dark thoughts. Revenge began to take shape right there on the quiet sidewalk of Oak Ridge, where the warm glow of porch lights could no longer erase the darkness he felt inside. What he would do next would change everyone's lives forever. Mike had always been a man of routines. At 38, he had built a solid career as a construction project manager in Pittsburgh, driven by determination and unyielding work ethic. He prided himself on being a good husband and father. Sarah, his wife, was the manager of a local supermarket known for her warm nature and easy smile. They lived in a comfortable two-story home in the Oak Ridge neighborhood, a refuge from the daily grind. Their marriage, which lasted more than a decade, was always seen as an example of a solid union. They had an 8-year-old son, Ethan, a bright and energetic boy. Mike and Sarah were always devoted to him, participating in all of his school and sporting activities. Life seemed to follow an ideal script until small cracks began to appear. Mike noticed that Sarah was becoming more and more distant. She started arriving late, citing inventory counts and meetings with suppliers. At first, he believed her explanations, but the frequency of her absences and her blank stare at home made him uneasy. Conversations became superficial and laughter became rare. It was as if a veil of indifference had fallen between them. The neighbor, Jake, was a man with an imposing presence, always friendly to everyone. He moved into the neighborhood 2 years earlier and quickly integrated himself into the community social circle. Single, successful, and charming, Jake worked as a personal trainer at the local gym and frequently organized fitness events and cookouts for residents, becoming a beloved figure. Mike and Sarah, like most, attended several of these gatherings where Jake always proved a generous host. That night started like any other. Mike returned home exhausted after an endless day at the construction site. Ethan was in the living room watching a TV show while Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He approached her, trying to start a conversation, but was met with a distracted smile and monosyllabic responses. The atmosphere was tense, and Mike decided to let it go, attributing her behavior to tiredness. During dinner, Sarah mentioned the barbecue at Jake's house. "You don't mind if I go, do you? I need to relax a little," she said, trying to sound casual. Mike nodded, although a twinge of distrust bothered him. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't want to confront her without proof. After Sarah left, Mike put Ethan to bed and sat in the living room trying to concentrate on a sports game, but the uneasiness grew, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. It was then that his phone buzzed with a text from Bill, his co-worker. "Saw your wife with Jake at Carter's Coffee yesterday. Looked pretty cozy. Thought you should know." Mike's blood ran cold. He fought the urge to ignore the message, but curiosity and fear were stronger. He left the house, his mind racing, heading to Jake's home. The short path down the street seemed eternal. When he arrived, he saw the party in full swing through the window. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for the worst, and entered without being noticed. The sight of Sarah in Jake's arms was a devastating blow. She didn't notice his presence right away, but when she did, the panic in her eyes was evident. Mike didn't make a scene. He just turned and left, feeling like each step took him further away from the man he thought he was. The walk back home was a blur of emotions. Anger and pain mixed together, creating a whirlwind in his mind. When he arrived, he found Ethan sleeping peacefully. The sight of his son brought a sense of responsibility that he could not ignore. He needed to stay calm for Ethan and find a way to deal with the betrayal. Over the next few days, Mike maintained a facade of normality. Sarah tried to talk to him several times, but he avoided her, fearing that any confrontation would result in an emotional breakdown. He began quietly planning his revenge, deciding he would expose Sarah's betrayal and make her feel the pain he felt. He hired a private detective who often worked with his construction company to follow Sarah and collect evidence of her affair with Jake. The photos and messages he received only confirmed his suspicions and fueled his anger. Mike knew he needed to be meticulous and patient. Revenge, he thought, is a dish best served cold. As Mike worked out his plan, he continued to be the devoted father and capable professional he had always been. Ethan, oblivious to his parents' emotional turmoil, continued to be the joy of his life. Mike decided that his revenge would not only punish Sarah, but also ensure that Ethan would not suffer the consequences of her betrayal. Mike's first step was to approach Jake in a calculated manner. One afternoon, he met him in the neighborhood park and suggested a meeting to discuss a potential home renovation project. Jake, without suspecting anything, readily accepted. Mike knew he needed to gain his neighbor's trust in order to publicly expose him. Thus, Mike began to outline the contours of his revenge. He was determined to turn pain into strategy, disappointment into action. The cat-and-mouse game was just beginning, and Mike was prepared for every move. The future, uncertain and dark, promised twists that no one could predict. The days passed slowly, and Mike became a shadow of the man he once was. His eyes, once full of life, now reflected the coldness of a meticulous plan. He began to study every detail of Jake and Sarah's routine, looking for any flaw that he could use to his advantage. Revenge had become his motivation, the fuel that powered his daily actions. The meeting with Jake took place at the local hardware store. Mike arrived punctually, finding Jake already settled in with a carefree smile. They discussed superficialities, home improvement projects, and life in the neighborhood. Mike maintained his mask of cordiality, feigning genuine interest. Jake's every word was analyzed and cataloged in his mind, another piece in the puzzle of his revenge. Mike's first move was simple but effective. He organized a neighborhood barbecue with the intention of getting even closer to Jake and Sarah. The gathering took place on a Saturday evening with the presence of several neighbors. Mike watched intently, interacting with the guests while keeping an eye on his wife and the trainer. He noticed the furtive glances and uncomfortable closeness between them. Every gesture was a confirmation of his betrayal. During the event, Mike introduced Jake to a contractor friend, suggesting they could collaborate on a gym renovation project. Jake, flattered, accepted the proposal without hesitation. Mike knew that gaining Jake's trust was crucial to the success of his plan. He would need to be close enough to unmask him at the right time. In the days that followed, Mike began to plant subtle doubts in Sarah's mind. Casual comments about fidelity, stories of betrayals by acquaintances, and reflections on trust in a relationship. Sarah, already racked with guilt, began to show signs of anxiety. Mike watched silently, pleased to see his words had an impact. The private detective continued to provide evidence, and Mike accumulated each piece with meticulous care, photos of meetings, messages exchanged, and even recordings of compromising conversations. He knew that when the time was right, this evidence would be his ultimate weapon. One day, while Sarah was at work, Mike received a call from the detective. "There's something you need to see," the voice on the phone said. They met in a discreet diner, and the detective handed over a thick envelope. Mike opened it, finding a series of photos of Sarah and Jake together in various places. Among the images, one stood out: Ethan smiling and playing with Jake in the community park. The physical resemblance between them was undeniable, and the revelation fell upon Mike like a final blow. Ethan was Jake's biological son. The discovery shook Mike deeply, but he decided to use this information as part of his revenge. He needed to expose Sarah and Jake, but also protect Ethan from any trauma. Mike spent sleepless nights planning every detail, every move. Revenge would be precise and devastating. He began manipulating situations to increase tension between Sarah and Jake, ingratiating comments, abruptly interrupting conversations, and even the suggestion that he was aware of the affair. Sarah began to show signs of nervousness, and Jake, although more confident, also showed concern. Mike organized a dinner at home, inviting Jake and some close friends. During the meal, he casually mentioned the importance of loyalty and the destruction that betrayal can cause in a family. Sarah almost dropped her glass of wine, and Jake tried to maintain his composure, but the tension was palpable. Mike knew the moment of revelation was approaching, and he needed to be prepared. The perfect opportunity arose when Jake invited Mike to participate in a weekend fitness retreat for men in the community. They traveled together, and Mike took advantage of the opportunity to strengthen his relationship of trust with his neighbor. During the trip, he asked questions about Jake's personal life, trying to extract any information he could use later. Jake, feeling safe, talked about his past relationships and his future ambitions, not realizing that every word was a weapon in Mike's hands. Back in Pittsburgh, Mike intensified his actions. He began leaving subtle clues for Sarah, like phone messages that suggested he knew more than he let on. Sarah, already worn down by guilt and fear, began to break down. Her absences became more frequent, and her excuses more fragile. Finally, Mike decided it was time to play his final card. He arranged a meeting with Jake and Sarah at the neighbor's house under the guise of discussing a potential home renovation. Mike arrived early, discreetly adjusting the cameras he had hidden to record everything. When Sarah arrived, Mike noticed her nervousness. Jake, on the other hand, seemed confident, believing he was in control of the situation. During the meeting, Mike confronted them with the evidence he had collected. Photos, messages, and recordings were displayed on the table, each one more incriminating than the last. Sarah broke down in tears while Jake tried to justify his actions. Mike remained calm, watching coldly as the truth unfolded before him. But the final blow was the revelation about Ethan. "You think you can destroy my life and get away with it?" Mike said, his voice cool and controlled. "Ethan is your son, Jake, and I have the proof to show everyone." The reaction was devastating. Sarah broke down, unable to bear the guilt and shame. Jake turned pale, speechless, realizing the extent of his actions. Mike left his neighbor's house feeling a strange satisfaction. Revenge was underway, and he knew the repercussions would be profound. He still had a lot to do to ensure justice was done, but in that moment, he tasted the initial victory. The room was silent, only broken by Sarah's sobs and the distant hum of neighborhood lawnmowers. Mike remained standing, observing the chaos he had unleashed with a cold, calculating gaze. Sarah tried to compose herself, wiping away her tears as she looked desperately at Jake, looking for some kind of support or explanation. "You knew all along?" Sarah's voice was shaky, almost a whisper. "You knew and let us continue?" Mike nodded slowly. "Yes, I knew, and I allowed you to dig your own grave. What surprised me was the extent of your betrayal." Jake, still pale, tried to regain some control of the situation. "Mike, we can work this out. Think about Ethan. He doesn't need to be dragged into this." Mike laughed, a bitter, empty sound. "Ethan is the only reason I didn't expose this sooner, but you left me no choice. You destroyed our family, Jake. You destroyed everything." The tension in the room was almost palpable as Mike's words hung in the air. Sarah tried to move closer to him, but Mike took a step back, his expression hardening. "Don't you dare touch me," he growled. "You have lost that right." Sarah backed away, tears filling her eyes again. "I was confused, Mike. Jake manipulated me. I thought you didn't love me anymore." "Didn't love you anymore?" Mike repeated, incredulity coloring his voice. "You thought I didn't love you, so you decided to cheat on me with a neighbor? And it wasn't just a betrayal. You had a son with him and made me believe that Ethan was mine." Jake intervened, trying to defuse the situation. "Mike, Sarah's right. It was a terrible mistake, but we can't let this destroy everything. We can find a way to move forward." Mike stared at Jake with deadly coldness. "Move on? Do you really think there's a move on after this? You think you can destroy my family and get away with it?" Mike's fury was evident, but he remained controlled. "I'm not going to hurt you, Jake. It would be too easy. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to see your life crumble before you, just like mine did." Jake tried to argue, but Mike interrupted him. "You will leave this city. You will disappear from our lives. And if you try anything at all, the evidence of this betrayal will end up in the hands of the right people. Your reputation at the gym, your clients, your career, everything you have built will disappear. Sarah fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. Mike, please don't do this. Think about Ethan. He needs us. Mike looked at her with a mixture of sadness and anger. Ethan is the only reason I'm willing to give you a chance, but I will never trust you again. Our relationship will never be the same. He turned to Jake one last time. You have until the end of the week to get out of here. If I still see you in Pittsburgh after this, the consequences will be devastating. Jake nodded, defeated. He knew Mike wasn't bluffing. I'll leave. You have my word. Mike didn't respond. He took the evidence from the table and left Jake's house, leaving a trail of emotional destruction behind him. The walk home was a mixture of relief and pain. He had begun his revenge, but he knew there was still a long way to go. Over the next few days, Mike maintained his usual routine, but now with renewed determination. He watched Sarah and Jake's every move, making sure they kept their promises. Jake started packing his things, and within a few days, his house was up for sale. Mike felt a grim satisfaction as he watched his neighbor leave, knowing that his life had been irrevocably changed. Sarah, on the other hand, was in a constant state of anxiety. She tried to redeem herself, doing everything she could to show Mike that she still loved him and deeply regretted her actions. But Mike remained distant, cold, without allowing her to get close emotionally. One night, while Ethan was in bed, Sarah approached Mike in the living room. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice breaking. Mike sighed but nodded. "Speak." "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm willing to do anything to save our marriage." Mike looked at her, his eyes reflecting the pain he felt. "Sarah, you destroyed my confidence. You broke something inside me that may never be fixed. I want to believe we can get through this, but I don't know if it's possible." Sarah wiped away a tear, trying to find the right words. "I'll do anything, Mike. Church counseling, marriage retreat, whatever it takes. Just don't leave me. Don't let our family fall apart." Mike was silent for a moment, fighting anger and sadness. "We'll try," he said finally. "But know that it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. It will take time, and you need to be willing to face it." Sarah nodded fervently. "I'm willing, Mike. Thanks for giving me a chance." Mike didn't respond. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he needed to try, for Ethan if not for anyone else. Revenge was underway, but he needed to balance that with the responsibility of being a good father. The days turned into weeks, and life continued tensely and silently. Mike stayed busy with his work and devoted every spare moment to Ethan, trying to provide his son with a sense of normality amid the chaos his life had become. Sarah, in turn, dedicated herself entirely to regaining Mike's trust, attending every counseling session at the community church and making a conscious effort to repair the damage done. Counseling began with individual sessions where both could express their emotions and frustrations without fear of judgment. Pastor Wilson, a calm and experienced man, helped Mike deal with his anger and resentment while Sarah worked on understanding her own actions and motivations. The joint sessions were even more difficult as they required brutal honesty and painful confrontations. Mike, although reluctant, began to see small changes in Sarah. She was genuinely sorry and committed to repairing the relationship. However, the pain of the betrayal and discovery about Ethan still weighed heavily on his heart, making it difficult for him to open up completely. Meanwhile, Mike continued to monitor Jake's situation. He discovered that Jake had moved to a small town far from Pittsburgh, trying to start his life over. While the physical distance brought some relief, Mike knew the emotional scars would remain. On a particularly cold winter night, while Pittsburgh was covered in snow, Mike received an unexpected call. It was from the private detective. "Mike, I have something you need to see. Can we meet?" Mike nodded, feeling a pang of apprehension. They met in a discreet diner as usual. The detective handed him an envelope, and Mike opened it, finding new photos and documents. Jake was involved in suspicious activity in the new city, possibly linked to steroid distribution at his new gym. "Why is this important to me?" Mike asked, intrigued. Because it might be an opportunity to make sure he doesn't cause trouble again, the detective replied. If this information gets into the right hands, Jake could be investigated and eventually arrested. Mike pondered the proposal. Part of him wanted to see Jake completely destroyed, paying for every mistake and betrayal. But he also knew he needed to focus on his own life and rebuilding what was left of his family. He decided to act. He turned the information over to the proper authorities, ensuring that Jake was investigated. The feeling of justice, although cold, brought him momentary peace. He knew he was doing what was right, not just for himself, but to make sure Jake didn't hurt anyone else. With Jake out of the picture, Mike turned his full attention to Sarah and Ethan. Counseling sessions began to show more significant results. Sarah opened her heart in ways she never had before, sharing deep fears, insecurities, and regrets. Mike, in turn, allowed himself vulnerability, acknowledging his own pain and frustrations. One night, while they were together in the living room, Sarah held Mike's hand. "I know I did something unforgivable, and I know you may never forgive me completely, but I want you to know that I love you and always have, and I will do everything I can to prove it every day." Mike looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I love you too, Sarah, and that's why this hurts so much. But I'm willing to try, for us and for Ethan." They hugged, a simple gesture but full of meaning. It was the beginning of a long healing process, a necessary step to rebuild the trust and love that had been destroyed. In the months that followed, Mike and Sarah worked tirelessly on their relationship. Counseling sessions continued, as did daily efforts to reconnect. Ethan, oblivious to many of the grim details, flourished with his parents' renewed attention and love. Mike knew the road ahead would be long and full of challenges. Revenge had brought a sense of justice, but not complete peace. He needed to learn to forgive, to let go of the anger, and to find a way to love again without reservation. The climax of their journey was not an explosion of emotions, but a quiet understanding that life is complex and nuanced. Mike and Sarah weren't just trying to save a marriage. They were rebuilding their own identities and finding a new path together. The months passed, and life began to find a new rhythm. Mike and Sarah, still in the healing process, began to rebuild what was left of their relationship. Ethan, happy and carefree, was a constant reminder that the effort was worth it. Mike knew that trust wouldn't be restored overnight, but the small steps forward were significant. Mike dedicated himself more and more to work and family, trying to balance the two important parts of his life. He began to seek new opportunities in his career, finding in his professional progress a way to channel the emotions he still struggled to control. Sarah, in turn, continued with counseling and found ways to strengthen her bond with Mike and Ethan. One morning, as Mike was getting ready for another day at the construction site, he received a text from Jake. Surprised, he cautiously opened the message. Jake was desperate, asking to meet Mike one last time. Reluctant but curious, Mike decided to grant the request. They met in a diner outside the city, away from familiar eyes. Jake was visibly haggard, with deep circles under his eyes and an expression of despair. "Mike, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need your help," Jake began, his voice shaking. Mike crossed his arms, maintaining an impassive expression. "Why should I help you, Jake, after everything you've done?" Jake sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm paying for them. But now I'm being threatened. The people I've been involved with are not the forgiving type." Mike looked at him, considering his words. "And what exactly do you expect me to do?" "I need someone who knows construction, who can help me with a secure exit plan. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking as one last hope." Mike considered the situation. The prospect of helping Jake was repulsive, but the idea that he could be a risk to his own safety and to Sarah and Ethan was even worse. "Very well," he said finally. "I'll help you, but know that this doesn't change anything between us. I'm doing this to protect my family." Jake nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mike. I'll do whatever it takes to right my wrongs." From that meeting on, Mike became involved in Jake's escape plan, using his skills to ensure the situation was resolved fairly and quickly. He kept Sarah informed about what was going on, making sure she knew the family's safety was his priority. While working on Jake's plan, Mike realized something important. Through this process, he was finding a new way to deal with his anger and resentment. Helping Jake, despite everything, was allowing him to process his own emotions in a healthier way. Sarah, seeing Mike's effort to resolve the situation, felt closer to him. She knew he was still hurt, but Mike's willingness to face the problem head-on was a sign that he was trying to move on. Counseling continued to be a crucial part of their lives. Mike and Sarah began to address the deeper issues in their relationship, exploring the reasons that led them to that situation and looking for ways to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. Mike began to realize that rebuilding his marriage wasn't just about forgiving Sarah, but also about forgiving himself for not seeing the signs and not being able to prevent the betrayal. One particularly revealing moment happened during a joint counseling session. Pastor Wilson asked them both to write letters to each other, expressing their feelings without the interference of immediate dialogue. Mike hesitated but ended up putting his frustrations, hurts, and hopes for the future on paper. Sarah did the same. When they read the letters to each other, there were tears and reconciliation. They realized that despite everything, there was still love and respect between them. The letters became a symbol of their journey together, a reminder that they were willing to fight for what really mattered. Meanwhile, Jake managed to resolve his issues with Mike's help. He left town permanently, promising never to interfere in Mike and Sarah's lives again. Mike felt a sense of relief to see Jake go, knowing that he could finally focus completely on his family without the shadow of the past hanging over them. Life began to stabilize. Mike and Sarah rediscovered the pleasure of little things, a family dinner, a walk in the park with Ethan, a quiet conversation at the end of the day. Every moment was a victory, a step toward healing. Mike still carried emotional scars, but he was learning to live with them. He knew that complete trust might never be restored, but he was willing to keep trying, one day at a time. Revenge had lost its luster, replaced by a deeper desire for peace and reconciliation. And so life went on, imperfect but full of possibilities. Mike and Sarah were ready to face the future, knowing that together, they could overcome any obstacle. Winter in Pittsburgh was fading, giving way to the promise of a renewing spring. Mike, Sarah, and Ethan were beginning to find a new rhythm, a new normality. The emotional scars still existed, but there was a conscious effort to rebuild the trust and intimacy that had been devastated. Mike was at the construction site when he received an unexpected call from his brother David, who lived in Cleveland. "Mike, I need to talk to you." "It's urgent," David said, his voice tense. "Of course, what happened?" Mike asked, worried. "It's about Jake. He was found dead in his home last night. The police are investigating, but it appears to be an overdose. They found steroids and other substances." Mike was silent, absorbing the news. Despite all the resentment he felt towards Jake, his death brought a whirlwind of emotions. Part of him felt relieved that a painful cycle had come to an end, but another part felt responsible in some way for the tragic outcome. David continued, "I know you had problems with him, but I thought you should know. If you need anything, I'm here." "Thanks, David. I'll digest this, and then we'll talk more," Mike replied, hanging up the phone. Mike spent the rest of the day in a state of introspection. Upon returning home, he decided to tell Sarah about Jake's death. She was shocked, tears streaming down her face. "Mike, do you think that was because of us?" "I don't know, Sarah. He was involved in a lot of things, but we can't let that destroy us too. We need to focus on what we have now," Mike said, trying to calm her down. Over the next few days, news of Jake's death spread, but Mike and Sarah decided to keep their distance from the situation. They continued to focus on their family, trying to find peace after so much turmoil. But Jake's ghost still hung over them, a constant reminder of past mistakes and betrayals. One night, while Ethan was in bed, Mike and Sarah had a deep conversation about the future. "I want us to be sure we're doing the right thing, Mike. For us and for Ethan," Sarah said, holding his hand. "Me too, Sarah, and I think we're on the right track. Let's focus on building something new, something worthwhile," replied Mike, feeling a weight lifted from his shoulders. Months passed, and the family began to truly stabilize. Counseling helped resolve many issues, and Mike and Sarah began to rediscover their love for each other. In an effort to start over, they decided to move to a new home in a different neighborhood, away from the painful memories of the past. Ethan was excited about the change, happy to explore a new environment. The new house was spacious and full of light, a symbol of a new beginning. Mike and Sarah dedicated themselves to creating new memories, focusing on strengthening their union and providing a happy life for Ethan. However, fate had one more twist in store. One morning, while unpacking boxes at the new house, Mike found an envelope addressed to him with no return address. When he opened it, he found a letter written by Jake before his death. "Mike, if you are reading this, it means my life has come to an end. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know the truth. I was forced to make terrible decisions, and I got involved with dangerous people. My life became unsustainable, and I saw death as the only way out. But there is something you need to know. Sarah never knew Ethan was my son. It was a decision I made alone, for fear of losing everything. She was innocent in many ways, and the weight of the truth was mine alone. I ask you to take care of her and Ethan, and please find a way to move forward, free from the shadows of the past. Jake." Mike was silent, absorbing the words. The revelation brought a new layer of complexity to the situation. Sarah didn't know. She was, in many ways, a victim of circumstances, just like him. Mike felt a mix of relief and sadness, but also a renewed determination to move forward. He shared the letter with Sarah that night. She read it, tears flowing silently. "I didn't know, Mike. I swear I didn't know. I believe you," Mike said, hugging her. "And this just reaffirms what we need to do. We need to move forward, together." Time passed, and life began to settle in the new house.